Hello, good afternoon, my dear students. Today I'm going to continue on the various epidemiological features of gastrointestinal disorders. Under this heading, I have almost completed most of the common gastrointestinal disease of public health importance. And today, I thought I'll discuss in general the problem of helminthiasis, epidemiology and prevention of helminthiasis. And this is a relatively a non-fatal problem, non-fatal disease, and it is associated with a lot of morbidity throughout the world. In the underdeveloped world, it leads to a lot of loss of work and also a lot of sickness among the children in the school-going age. That's why we are interested in giving the various aspects of epidemiology and prevention of helminthiasis in general, so that we can give the children, small children, a quality of life which is required for them to grow up as healthy citizens of this world. Okay, so let me start the definition. That is, the term helminthology is the study of parasitic worms and their effect on the host. It is in general. So helminthology, there can be helminthology for the human being and helminthology for the animals. Because we are studying the human problems, I will be restricting myself to the human elements causing disease in the human beings. So it is the study of parasitic worms and the effects on the human beings. Now, as far as the human beings are concerned, the elements belonging to three important classes: class Nematoda, class Trematoda, and class H. These are the three important classes that are important for discussion purposes. It's not that others are not involved in the human transmission, but majority of the elements belong to these three categories. That is nematodes, trematodes, and cystodes. Okay, so nematodes in general, they are rounded and cylindrical structures. Trematode, they are usually stout and blunt organisms, and cystodes are long tape-like organisms, very long tape organisms. So this is general description of the nematodes, trematodes, and cystodes. Now, the helminths infesting, not infecting, infesting the human being are again broadly divided into two types. One type is geohelminth. Geo means, you must be knowing that geo means soil, helminths in the soil. Biohelminths, helminths which require the biological organs and the biological environment for the growth to continue, for the life cycle to continue. Okay. Geohelminths, usually they are very simple. Their life cycle is very simple, not complicated. And usually they complete their life cycle in one host. And they do not have any intermediate hosts. So these are the geohelminths. Exemplified ascarid, hookworms, pinworms. There are many, but these three are important for our discussion as far as human helminthiasis is concerned. Now, biohelminths, they are having a very complicated life cycle, and they undergo development in the intermediate host and then transmitted to the human being. That means the reservoir of infection is much more broader than geohelminths. But thing is, geohelminths can live in the soil without much contact with the human being for some time. So that means their ability to survive in the environment is much better than the biohelminths. If the biohelminths are not getting the intermediate host, they will die. Whereas the geohelminths, even if the animal or the human being where they usually complete their life cycle is not there, still they can grow in the soil for some time. That means they have got better survival capacity rather than biohelminths. Now, the biohelminths consist of filariasis, liver fluke, and tapeworms. Right? Filariasis, the intermediate host is the mosquito. Liver fluke is the intermediate host, maybe any mammal. Tapeworm, most probably the intermediate host is a pig or the cow or the um, ungulates. Ungulates. Any of these things may be the intermediate host. That means these biohelminths, if the intermediate host is not there, they can be totally eliminated. Okay, and before they transmit the disease to the human being, if they are the intermediate hosts are eliminated, we always do the culling of the animals. In that particular instance, there is a possibility of completely eradicating the biohelminths. Now let me go through quickly the various aspects of the frequency of this disease or distribution of this disease. You can see here it's a percentage of infestations in the world, the global level. So we have listed various types of elements infecting the human beings. You can see the most common element is Ascaris. Okay? And the least common is Trichinella. And all the others in the Strongyloides, tapeworms, cystisomiasis, Entropius, Vermicularis, Filariasis, Trichuris trichura, hookworms, they fall in between. And this is the distribution in billion, number of infections in billions. That means the Ascaris, the number of infections that are reported for the global surveillance is 1.8 billion. Now coming to the global distribution, you can very clearly see here that now you can see here that most of the developing countries are very badly affected. You can see here the sub-Saharan Africa and even the South American countries, the Central American countries here, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and to some extent China, Korea, the North Korea, and Indonesia. And these are the various areas where you find a large proportion of these elements are available, are reported. Now let us see the WHO estimates of it. It is estimated by World Health Organization in 2014-15 survey, which they have done throughout the world, they could find out that 267 million toddlers and 568 million school-going children are at a risk of getting helminth. Please read this sentence very carefully because it is not the number of children affected. It is the number of children living in the areas where there is a high likelihood of transmission. That is, the risk is extremely high. If these children are not careful enough in their drinking habits and eating habits, they can easily be infected. Now, 2 billion people are infected. So you can see here, the risk is almost 7 to 8 billion. Out of this, actual infection that is seen is 2 billion of the soil transmitted elements. I want to recall to you, soil elements are ascaris, hookworm, all these. 249 million with schistosomiasis. And 56 million people with foodborne dermatitis. 120 million with lymphatic filariasis. 0.1 million die annually due to soil transmitted health. This is the various the statistics available regarding the helminthiasis. I would like to tell you very clearly that these are all almost very low estimates because most of these helminth infestations are not reported by the parents or even not reported even by the medical office because they are taken for granted that is it's a common problem among the children and among the people. So they tend to be neglected. And many times what happens is the number of cases which are reported may be little, over exaggerated in certain areas. Now coming to the Indian scenario, the Indian scenario is extremely grim. 225 million children in 1 to 14 age group are affected in India itself. It represents about 27% of global infection rates. And statewide data for this country is not available. And it is predicted, it is always felt that the Bimaru states, where the Bihar, UP, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh, these 4 states, they account for about 80 to 90% of all these infestations. That's what I told you, it's mostly underestimated. You may have to multiply the figures with 2 or 3. This is only because in India, open field defecation is a norm, it is a tradition, it is a custom. People accept it without much any inhibitions. In fact, many times what happens is when we go and talk to the people about the open field defecation and try to stop it, there are a lot of people who answer by saying that, sir, how can we go in the 4 walls? And it is very unhealthy to defecate within the 4 walls. And they also say that when we are going for open field defecation, we enjoy the nature and we enjoy the fresh air. So if you are asking us to go into the toilet, we may fall sick. This is the type of behavior our people have got. Now coming to the agent factors, all these elements are obligatory endoparasites in the human tissues. Some of them may be lodged inside the intestine, some of them are in the liver, some of them may be lodged inside the lymph nodes, like that. Various types of tissues and organs are involved in their living, and they complete their life cycle inside the body. Eggs or cysts are released into the fecal material from time to time, and the eggs and the cysts are not affected by the intestinal juices because they are well protected. And these cysts, they come out of the fecal material, they go into the soil, they develop there, and also mature in the soil, and they wait for another susceptible host to pick up these mature eggs, so that they can start a new life in the other people. So this is a very vicious cycle that a person in a community is passing thousands and thousands of cysts. They are all picked by the other human beings. It becomes a sort of uh, all out phenomenon where each and every one may be infected with these organisms. They are resistant to environmental contaminant. Once they are passed into the fecal material, they are not easily destroyed. They can survive the adverse circumstances in the soil, and they can perpetuate their base. One of the important points about all these organisms are the helminths is they rarely produce severe symptoms. That's why people are not bothered. They tend to live with these helminths. Male and female parasites usually coexist inside the intestines. And as far as morphological size is concerned, they range from a very tiny small organisms to very huge, elongated and lengthy organisms like tapeworms. You have got a pinworm which is just visible to the naked eye, and we have got a tapeworm, that is the tapeworm, the Taenia saginata, which may sometimes grow up to 2 or 3 meters. It's a very huge tapeworm. Now I'm trying to give you some insight into the types of worms which I have already described. You have got helminths. Helminths are broadly divided into platyhelminths and nemathelminths. That means nemathelminths are roundworms or nematodes. They are unsegmented and they got separate cells. Male and female are there. Whereas platyhelminths, you have got cystodes and trematodes. And cystodes are segmented and separate sex. Whereas trematodes are unsegmented hermaphrodite. So to sum up, the cystodes are segmented and they have got separate sex. Whereas trematodes are unsegmented hermaphrodite. And nematodes unsegmented and separate sex. So these are the 3 important types of helminths that we have. That is the cystodes, trematodes, and nematodes. These are 3 types of things I told in the beginning itself. They are very much important for the human helminthiasis. So these are some of the helminths that are here. Here you can see here whipworm, a liver fluke, ascaris, pinworm, and pork tapeworm. That is, it is from the pig, and this is bovine tapeworm from the cows and buffaloes. Or in general, it is ungulates. Okay, so we have got these are different types of organisms. These are the most common ones that you have to remember. So you can see here these organisms may live in the liver, they may live in the intestines, they may live in the large intestine, and they have their own choice in the ultimate place where they are living. Now let me spend some time about Ascariasis. Ascariasis is the most common type of infestation. I told you very clearly in the beginning itself. The male and female are there, very long and cylindrical structures. The male is usually shorter than the female. You can see here, this is the female, which is the larger one, and the male is the small one. And male is also short-lived. It is not only short, it's also short-lived. Okay. So these two organisms, they reside inside the intestines, and the eggs are produced, and the eggs are passed on, and there is a terrible multiplication of these organisms inside the intestine itself. And the person may get into auto-infestation. He is passing the eggs and is not washing the anus, and the eggs are sticking onto his fingers. With the same hand where eggs are sticking, he may eat the food. That means the eggs which are passed in the fecal material, they again enter through the mouth, and they cause multiplication of these roundworms. The most important point about roundworms is that if the number of organisms are increasing in a very, in a very uncontrollable manner, sometimes what happens is these organisms may cause intestinal obstruction. And once the number of organisms are more, they usually turn into a ball-like structure, all these organisms. And these balls, when they can obstruct the intestinal lumen and may cause a sudden and severe intestinal obstruction. And it is only by virtue of surgical intervention will be able to save the child. The child may have all the typical symptoms of intestinal obstruction. He may have vomitings, and he may have abdominal pain, and he cannot eat. Severe pain will be there, and the only way to save the child is to arrange for the abdominal surgery, where you can dissect the intestine and remove the intestine physically by means of surgical procedures. Then we have the second one, that is hookworm infestations. They are important not because they give any acute complications, the emergency, but they are important because they drain the blood of the human being. They will be there on the intestinal mucosa. They make small punch holes in the intestine, and through these holes, the blood may leak into the intestines, and continuously, if there are many number of these organisms, there are a lot of leakages in the intestine, and also the organism eats on the blood of the human being, and progressively and steadily the person may become grossly anemic. I have seen in my clinical practice with a person having hookworm infestations has gone up to the level of 2 grams per cent. Can you imagine? 12 grams per hour, 14 grams per cent is normal, and it may go on to 2 grams per cent. It's extremely very bad situation. The gross anemias can occur with hookworm infestations. Then we have pinworm. It is relatively much better than roundworms and the hookworms. They may cause some amount of undernutrition, malabsorption syndromes. It is not that much important as far as the roundworm and the hookworms are concerned. Less important, but it is the proportion-wise they are also very much there. This is ripworm. You can see here a long rip is there, the ripworm, and this is also less important when compared to the roundworms and the hookworms. Now we have got the Taenia solium, which is actually the intermediate host is a pig, and those people are eating the beef, eating the pork, uncooked pork or badly cooked pork. These tapeworms easily get into the human system, and they develop into very long segmented worms, and they can cause again intestinal obstruction sometimes, and the person may develop severe intestinal symptoms. Sometimes Taenia solium is supposed to be having uh, the cerebral symptoms at a later stage. This is Tinea saginata again. This is also extremely long one when compared to this solium. This is almost 3 times longer than the Tinea solium. This is from the cows and buffaloes or ungulates. Again, this is saginata and solium. Both are involved in certain neurological manifestations in the human beings. Now we come to the reservoir of infection. The reservoir of infection includes by close contact with the infected animals are the reservoir of infection, and infected meat is also reservoir of infection, and the human excreta is a reservoir, and human and the animal excreta which is there in the soil is also a reservoir of infection. And the soil pollution and water pollution, both are the soil which is having a lot of these eggs, and the water having these eggs also is a reservoir of infection. And in the case of filariasis, it is mosquito as a reservoir of infection. So the reservoir of infection is a very broad one. Either it is an infected animal, or and once it is killed and sacrificed, the infected meat can be a reservoir of infection. And the animals, when they are living, they pass on the excreta, and this excreta, by chance of unhygienic habits, it may get into the human system, and the soil, which is highly laden with the eggs, can also cause problems. Mosquitoes in the case of filariasis. These are all the reservoir of infections. Now, modes of transmission. It is mostly direct ingestion. It is by virtue of our contaminated hands, we get these infections. Auto-infection. People who are already infected, they get reinfected again and again because of auto-infection. Retrograde infection, sometimes in the case of Enterobius vermicularis, the eggs are laid at the sun, and they pass on to the anus, and from the anus they may again suck back into the system, and they can cause retrograde infection. It's airborne infections in some occasions is very rare, and penetration of intact skin. Penetration of intact skin is important because in the case of hookworms, it can be penetration of intact skin, because when you don't wear chappals, it can lead to the hookworm infestations. It can be transplacental infection in the case of hookworms, and the organisms are through the ovum, transplacental. The person is infected, the woman is infected, and she is pregnant, and the cyst may be passed on through the placenta to the unborn child. And some of these things may be passed on to the breast milk also. Out of all these things, the direct injection, auto-injection are the most important modes of transmission. And also the penetration of skin also important in the case of hookworm infestation. Whereas transplacental and through the breast milk is extremely rare, but it can occur. Now coming to the host factors associated with the weaning practices. Please remember this. As long as the child is solely breastfed, no other food is given to the child is extremely protected, because the milk, though I said that it is passed on to the milk, is very rare. So even if it is infected mother, passing of the organisms to the milk is extremely rare. But as long as the child, even though the child belongs to low socioeconomic status, as long as the child is getting the breastfeeding, the chances of helminthiasis are extremely low. Okay, the moment weaning is started, external food is given, it's almost always contaminated and it can lead to higher levels of the infestations. Now, female literacy. Lower the literacy rate, they do not bother about the food hygiene and water hygiene and also the weaning practices. So, the woman's literacy is very much important. In the one study done in Agra, I can give you some other references. In that study, they have taken literacy status and also the infestation among the children. They found out that the children belonging to literate mothers, they are usually less infected when compared to the children of the illiterate mothers. It has been proved to be statistically significant. I said low socioeconomic status is important, and poor environmental conditions like a lot of house flies are there, and the food and water is getting contaminated very often. School children are highly susceptible, especially in developing countries and with a special emphasis on India. You can see most of our schools are overcrowded. They are sitting on the benches so close together that if one child is infested and he may pass on these organisms or eggs very easily to other children because they're sitting so close and touching each other so well, so much. That's why the school children are highly susceptible. And we have done a small study in Manipal, and we have taken the food, the stool samples and examined in the microbiology department for the evidence of the various types of organisms. We came to conclusion that it is almost 99% of the school children are affected with the one or the other type of the ailments. And again, I would like to emphasize here, there is no cross immunity. The same child may have pinworms and hookworms and roundworms and all types of worms may be there in the same child. It's not that roundworm is there, hookworm is not there. There is no cross immunity between these various organisms. Toddlers are at high risk because they go around the house and start eating whatever there on the floor, and the floor is already contaminated, and it's a possibility of these toddlers getting more of these infestations is a possibility. Food handlers are highly susceptible because they are cutting the meat and the meat has got all the organisms and the eggs. When they are handling the meat products, they may ingest the eggs and the ova and they may get into problems much more easily. Now let me give you some of the health consequences. The health consequences, they damage the intestinal tissues, especially this true with the hookworm infestations. They can cause injury to the lymph nodes and organs, lymph vessels and organs. And there is a possibility of loss of blood, iron and protein. And it can also lead to malabsorption, nutritional deficiencies, especially vitamin deficiencies. B deficiencies are extremely common with the children having helminthiasis. And one of the epidemiological factors in undernutrition or malnutrition is helminthiasis. Anemia can occur when the child is not eating well and the mother is not eating well. They can lead to allergies because the existence of these, especially it is true with the hookworm infestation, they can cause allergic manifestations in the lung. So there may be a lot of abdominal complications, sometimes leading to the death. These are the various health consequences of the ailments. Now let me tell you very clearly the 10 points in the control of helminthiasis. These are the 10 commandments that we can talk. We have to see that the sanitary disposal of human excreta is done efficiently well. You know, we have got the sanitary latrines in most of the places, especially in the rural areas. Sometimes it may not be there, and open field defecation is resorted to. These are the areas where there is a high risk of helminthiasis. In the case of urban areas, there is a very good sewage channel, and there is a sewage canal leading, and all the sewage is removed and it disposed of very easily, and there is not much of risk of helminthiasis in urban areas when the sanitary disposal is done properly. Now, composting and efficient disposal of sewage. Many times this sewage is just dumped outside the cities, and this is the most important cause for the spread of the helminths. This should be composted and efficiently disposed of. And we have to instruct the mother or the housewife who is in charge of the kitchen to clean the vegetables and fruits with water, or at least if it is possible with amount of salt water, so that the eggs which are sticking on the raw vegetables and fruits may not reach our intestinal system. The control of flies, again, the fourth point is a very important point. The flies can cause a lot of transmission problems. And the cooked foods, if they are left out without much care, these are the foods which can be completely infested with the eggs by means of houseflies. That's why it's better. And once the food is left off, it's better to eat the food material on the same day, but sometimes it's not possible. If the left out food, the cooked food is there, it should be quickly refrigerated. If you are having animals inside the house and they have a risk of transmission to the human being, see that the animal wastes are disposed properly. And frequent hand washing. We always talked about COVID, and here also it is important, frequent hand washing. Cleaning of utensils, sometimes your hands are clean, but utensils are unclean. So when the utensils are not clean, even though you are washing your hands frequently, it can still cause the helminthiasis. Healthy cooking practices are important, and if the cooking practices are not good, it can lead to the transmission of the disease. And we have got a very important National Deworming Day. That is the 10th of February of every year. There is a National Deworming Day. On this day, a lot of health education programs are conducted throughout the country about the helminthiasis. So these are the 10 points you should remember. Sanitary disposal of human excreta, composting of the efficient composting or efficient disposal of the sewage treatment, and mandatory washing of the raw vegetables, control of flies, refrigeration of cooked foods, disposal of animal waste, frequent hand washing, and cleaning of utensils, healthy cooking and practices, National Deworming Day. If you observe properly, especially in the school children, probably you can bring down the helminthiasis to a very negligible levels. So this is all about helminthiasis. In fact, helminthiasis, as far as your examinations are concerned, they are not of important as far as the major questions are concerned. You may get minor questions or short notes from the chapters of helminthiasis. That's why I am skipping to one more small chapter, small topic, which is the foodborne illnesses in general. The foodborne illnesses in general, and helminthiasis is also one of the examples of foodborne illnesses. And these are a group of diseases, sometimes infectious, sometimes by means of toxins, and caused by living and non-living structures. That means if it is an infectious disease, it is caused by the living organism. It is toxic, it is by means of the non-living organisms, non-living chemicals and structures. It is definitely through the food, not through the water. Then the foodborne infections can be broadly divided into foodborne infections and foodborne toxins. I have already told you. Definition itself says that partly it is due to toxins, partly it is due to the organisms. So let us go through the list of foodborne toxins. They are all naturally occurring. They are bacterial, sometimes fungal. Toxic chemicals coming from the bacteria and the fungi. Foodborne infections, mostly the bacterial, viral, parasites, protozoans. These are all the foodborne infections, which are through the food. Now coming to the agent factors, we have a group of toxins which are dealt in the nutrition, that is BOA, betoxylamine, aflatoxin, ergot, fusarium toxins, pyrazinamide are the toxins, heavy metals that is usually in the fishes and the shellfishes. They are at the risk of getting these heavy metals. Pesticides, these are all nowadays we are worried about the pesticides. There is one particular syndrome known as the Handigondu syndrome, which is detected by ICMR in some parts of Karnataka, and this Handigondu syndrome is only because of pesticides. Some of the petroleum products and the migrant chemicals. Then all these things can cause foodborne toxicities. Coming to the organisms, we have got the most common one is the rotavirus. It's a foodborne infection, and sometimes it may be waterborne also. Salmonella, already I told you. Shigella, I told you. Streptococci, Staphylococcus, Clostridium, Brucella, Amoeba, and Ascaris. These are all the foodborne. Ascariasis is mostly foodborne. Amoeba is mostly foodborne. And Clostridium, Welchite, Clostridium tetanus, both are through the foodborne infections. Staphylococci, again foodborne. Streptococci, sometimes waterborne also, mostly it is foodborne. So all these organisms are the most common organisms which are causing foodborne infections. The host factors, age is very important. The foodborne infections are more common in the children and the aged population. The socioeconomic status is important because the low socioeconomic status is usually associated with all the infections, just like it is common for every disease. Personal hygiene, very low personal hygiene can lead to foodborne infections. Home sanitation, the mother is just not bothered, right? The mother is not sweeping the house and she is not cleaning the house. The house floor is full of the organisms, and the child is eating the food, and some part of the food is spilling on the floor, and that food which is spilled on the floor, the child is eating directly from the floor. It is a major problem for the foodborne infections. Low mineralogical status can lead to higher levels of the foodborne infection. Environmental factors, urbanization, rapid urbanization leading to very bad housing conditions can lead to foodborne infections. Industrialization, where the people are working and they do not have a proper place to eat, and there also when the food is not properly stored, properly consumed, it can lead to foodborne infections. Food adulterations also can cause foodborne infections. Environment pollution which are settling into the water and also to the food, then it can cause. Again, mass catering. Catering companies are there, very big companies are there. If the catering is not properly done, indiscriminately it is done, it can lead to foodborne infections. A large, epidemics can occur with the contaminated food, and we call it as the food poisoning. The term is food poisoning here. And tourism, frequent traveling, and you are away from your house, you don't have food prepared at home, and you are not sure about the quality of the food which you are taking in the canteens and hotels. So These are all the environmental factors which we should remember. Again, just as I told you the 10 points about helminthiasis, I would like to tell you the 10 points about foodborne illnesses. 1. Select and store your raw food safely. See, usually we don't buy raw food every day. We may buy the raw foods once in 3 days or once in 3 or 4 days, and we don't go every day and take the raw foods. So in that case, what happens is when you are going to the market, you have to select the raw foods from a place where you are likely to get uncontaminated food, raw foods. Especially if you are buying it from the slaughterhouse, where the slaughterhouse is not very well placed. And sometimes you can see in Vizag city itself, a lot of slaughterhouses and a lot of meat shops where the meat is being sold. They are just by the side of drainage. Okay, and there is a possibility that the drainage water may be removed and it may be used for cleaning of these meat substances. And so you should be very careful in selecting the food material from where you are getting the food and the source of the food material. All these things you should be very carefully doing it. And after purchasing these raw foods, you bring it to the home. Just don't throw it wherever you want. It should be kept in a. It should be cleaned first. Please remember. Please clean all the raw food material, both fruits and the vegetables and all the raw food, and also the meat, fish, everything should be cleaned properly, and then they should be properly stored inside the fridge. Because you are not using on the same day, there's a possibility that these raw foods may be contaminated and they can give rise to foodborne infections. It is better always to store them in a refrigerator. And store your cooked food more safely. You know, we have got a fridge with so many compartments are there. It's always known that if you are keeping the food in the upper compartments, it is much more cooler than the compartments which are down. So the cooked food material should go upwards, because the upper one, they are very, very close to the freezer. So from the freezer, the cool gas is coming out, and so they can keep the food materials much safer than keeping the food in the lower compartments. Okay. Cook and eat the food on the same day. It is the dictum given by WHO, and it is very safe and good for all of us. Even though we may say that we have got fridges, we have got deep freezers, whatever it is. If you have the habit of cooking enough amount of food for that day and try to eat on the same day, it is much better than the storing the food material in the fridges and deep freezers. You know very well that the power supply is not continuous. Power supply may go off many times, and when the power supply is gone for a few hours, the inside temperature of the fridge may be the normal temperature outside. So when the food is kept at that increased hot temperatures inside the fridge itself, they are at high risk of getting the spoil, and they can give rise to more and more number of foodborne illnesses. So it is a dictum that cook enough food for that day, eat that whole food, and don't keep anything for the next day. And is my general advice to all of you. You know, I've been telling since I was talking about various types of diseases, including the COVID. I told you that most of our diseases are traceable to the animals. Either eating animals or animal products are extremely responsible for various types of diseases. I'm not advising again that you should stop eating the animal foods. You can always try to compromise and try to reduce and try to see that it is slowly replaced with the plant foods. You know very well that plant foods do not harm us much, whereas animal foods they harm us more. Think of viral diseases, think of bacterial diseases, mad cow disease, and all these things, the swine flu, all these things you can think of, there is some sort of animal link. So if you can stay away from eating the animals, probably the risk of getting the diseases can be totally eliminated. Check the food handlers regularly. You have got hostel, food handlers. You have got food handlers outside, and make it mandatory that all these food handlers are regularly checked for the evidence of any disease, especially the salmonellosis or the typhoid is a very dangerous disease. One cook who is infected with the salmonellosis can infect hundreds and thousands of people because of his food material. Okay, so like that, you have to check the food handlers on a regular basis and try to treat them if they are found to be suffering from any disease. And food handlers should also be checked for the evidence of skin manifestations. If there is boils or the pyogenic infections of the skin, they are the culprits in transmitting the staphylococcal infections. Sometimes staphylococcal infections can be fatal. As far as possible, avoid eating outside, and always cook at home, and try to put it in a safe container, bring it and eat it in the workplace also. It's always safer to eat the food prepared at home because you are sure the way it is prepared. Wash your hands before taking food. It is a general measure, whether you are eating with spoon, whether you are eating with your hands, whatever it is, you have to wash your hands before and make it a habit. If soap is not there, still no problem. Running water is more than sufficient for removal of the eggs and the. Wash your hands after defecation. It make it a mandatory. Immediately after defecation, you will wash your hands. Control the breeding of the houseflies. See that the houseflies are controlled from time to time. And notify the foodborne illnesses wherever it is possible. So these are the 10 commandments of the foodborne illnesses. And if you follow these 10 commandments, probably we will not have a problem of foodborne illnesses in future. And the government has got a major role in the control and the prevention of the foodborne illnesses. They should set these standards, food standards, and they should quickly and periodically check the food standards at various places of selling. Regular monitoring of food establishments, and we have got a food inspector also available in each of the municipalities and also the rural areas, and they are supposed to visit by surprise some of these food handlers and take regular samples from them and send them to the laboratory and see that the food is safe for consumption. And PFA Act, Prevention of Food Adulteration Act. This is a very important act which is, if it is properly implemented, I can tell you that we can totally control or at least eliminate most of the foodborne illnesses. Again, health education. People do not know that if they find the contaminated food and if they have the symptoms of this, they do not know where to report. They have to report this matter and see that that particular vendor giving the contaminated food is immediately punished. And also further problems of the foodborne diseases can be completely controlled. So these are some of the 10 points which I thought I will talk to you in general. And today, quickly I could complete the helminthiasis, epidemiology, helminthiasis and control, and also the epidemiology and prevention of foodborne illness in general. These two topics are covered, and please remember these two topics are important as short notes. And if you, it's better to write the short notes well, because these are the areas where you can get more marks than the major questions. Major questions you may not get full marks, whereas Short notes is if you are attempting properly, you can get full marks in the short notes. And I would like to inform all of you that your second internal assessment is due, and we are trying to chalk out common dates for ENT, ophthalmology, and community medicine. We'll be able to intimate to you very soon, because your first internal assessment is over, and we have to go for the second internal assessment. Probably this will also be online. Okay, and we do not know whether if these colleges are reopening, we may have a usual examination pattern. Otherwise, we may have to go for the online examination for the second session examination. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please you can send a message now. I can give you some time.